Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular council meeting for Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. We respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather and work is on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather. It's okay. I'm just going to say that one more time. So we respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather and work is on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. So we have no introduction or approval of late items. I will move for adoption of the November 20th regular meeting agenda to be adopted, please. Moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on the agenda? All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. So our first delegation is Jemima Thomas, the Interim Executive Director for the Comox Valley Arts Council, who is here with a Arts Council update as well as a presentation. So we'll just get your presentation up on the screen and you will have about 10 minutes. Welcome to our chambers.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Thank you very much to the council and staff for hearing my delegation today. I'm Jemima Thomas. I'm the interim ED of the Comox Valley Arts Council. I know. Let's have a look. Maybe I might just have to look at you to move the slides. I'm so sorry. Thank you. I'm here to provide an organizational update so that you understand who we are and what we do in your and our community. Can you go to the next slide?
Maybe we'll just take a quick second to get a tech check.
Give it another go. Ooh. Give you that. Yeah. Okay. You may all be familiar with our work, but I will read our mission that has guided the work of the Arts Council over the past 56 years. We support and promote and celebrate our vibrant, inclusive arts community. We are actively educating and promoting Comox Valley as a creative and dynamic arts producing centre. Next slide, thank you. Over the past 2 years, CV Arts has refined, deepened, and made more impactful its work within the community. This is reflected in data and anecdotally from artists, members of the public, and our community partners. We've seen growth across our programs in terms of participation, but we are also witnessing more than what data can tell. Specifically, we have made strides with community partnerships, CV Arts functioning as a sort of organizational glue that is bringing people and organizations together to build something greater than the sum of its parts. Can you go to the next slide? There is not enough time to go through all of our programming for the past year, and so I'll be pulling out some of the highlights. To begin, it is helpful to break our work down into 3 distinct areas: advocacy, programs, which are led and managed exclusively by CV Arts, and partnerships. Thanks. This year, our advocacy efforts focused on uniting the arts community across the valley, fostering collaboration and mutual support. Looking ahead to 2025, we are partnering with Experience Comox Valley to launch an art trail app for the region. Additionally, we are supporting the planning of an exhibition hop in April, featuring organizations from across the valley. We also started some conversations around the need for a public art policy. Our work to create a best practice handbook in mural development aims to provide a roadmap for folks in the community seeking to create more murals. It champions the value of hiring professional artists and the strong need for community engagement at the centre of public art programming. We see the potential economic benefit to the Comox Valley for having a renowned public art programme as a destination driver, business development opportunity, but also creating a sense of place for residents and visitors. Next slide. Programmatically, CV Arts packs a punch for a 200k operating budget. Our programs include providing a regional studio tour for the Central Island area, offering a small grant program that funds artists and community members seeking to provide participatory arts-based opportunities to members of the community, providing a low-barrier recording and digital tech studio to artists in the community to up their game called the Digital Creation Hub, offering professional development programs for artists to advance their skills, market themselves, and deepen their practices, and providing a roving art wagon that can show up at events across the region, offering pop-up art opportunities. Next slide. Due to our small but mighty capacity, a great deal of our work is done in partnership with other organisations. This allows us to leverage our team skills and extend our mission far beyond what we are capable of alone. We partner with the Comox Valley Airport and the Chamber of Commerce to provide more spaces for local artists to show work. Another hugely successful partnership this past year was with the Mickey Soo Métis Association and the community radio station CVOX. Together we piloted Ancestral Echoes, a program that partners elders with young people to create an intergenerational story sharing podcast. We've received a grant to extend this program to season 2 and 3 this fiscal year. 2 of our participants are on the slide, Ava and Bryce. Slide. I want to highlight some of CV Arts' key goals for the next 12 months. These include that we will build on the success of our past programs, meaning that for the coming year, we will provide the same programming as fiscal year 23-24, with the addition of using data to inform how we deepen and grow. Another key goal is that we're seeking funding to support and expand key programs. Additionally, we will be expanding promotional networks and continuing to improve internal operations. What can our community expect from CV Arts in the future? This might look like more art wagon sightings in the Valley, deepening our reconciliation work with key partners, and expanding our summer festival series Pulse from the Plaza. Thank you for hearing me speak today. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the tech issues there that were on our side.
Thank you for the slides.
Thank you for bringing them. Councillor Swift.
Thank you for bringing your information to us. It's the first time we've had somebody come, so it's interesting to see. Could you tell me a little bit more about the art wagon? If you had something happening, can you book it, or how does that work?
Good question. So it's not bookable by the public at the moment. I think that's a really interesting idea for the future, though. The idea is that it's a trailer and it's being glammed up on the outside to represent CV Arts and be a friendly and inclusive space. And at the moment, it's empty on the inside and can be used for kind of our programming that we do. We had it out on Moonlight and Magic with a photography, drawing with light photography program based in there. But the future of it, hopefully with a bit more funding, will be that it would be kitted out for art exhibitions or for people to run workshops out of. So that would be just making sure that the inside is suitable for that. And then that would go around to schools, to different community organizations, as well as to more remote places in the Valley, bringing pop-up exhibitions or workshops.
Councillor Mayer.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We have an official community plan refresh that is just about to start. I'm curious if you might have some contributions to make to the official plan.
Yeah, that would be very interesting to work with. We're working with the City of Courtenay on their cultural strategy at the moment, and I can imagine there's quite a lot of transferable skills.
It's wonderful. And then the Pulse on the Plaza that's in Courtenay, have you ever explored bringing any of that kind of public space animation to Comox?
So the public space animation was new for us last year. We did 3 festivals, and it's something that we would like to do more and more in the future, bringing it to Comox as well. It's something that we're securing funding, but also getting staff for at the moment who are specializing in public space activation.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm just curious, out of that 200,000 budget you mentioned, is it like a nonprofit society where you're able to get government grants, or is it membership based where any of those 50 to 60 organizations all pay into membership? Where is kind of that $200,000 budget coming from?
So it's municipal, regional, and the city of Courtney will give us money, as well as from more private grants as well. We also have membership, but that's a very small part of our budget.
Looks like that was all the questions. And so, yeah, if there's a formal request that comes through, we would review that. Otherwise, that's a nice foundation of what the council is doing for now.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome to stay for the meeting, but we also, of course, understand that you're welcome to pop out at your leisure. The second delegation this evening for DVP 24-4, 1966 Guthrie Road. Rudy Vanden Brink was not able to attend this evening. And it looks like the third delegation for development variance permit application DVP 24-4 is not here in person, unless we'll just double check online. Is there anyone waiting to get in the waiting room? Okay, so we will just move on to page 8, adoption of the regular council meeting minutes for November 6th, 2024 to be adopted. Moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on those minutes? All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. We're now on page 14, the Strategic Planning Committee meeting minutes for Wednesday, November 13th, 2024 to be received. Moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on those meeting minutes for November 13th? All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. We're now on to committee recommendations. Number 1, that parcel area and frontage width in the R1 small scale multifamily zone, that council directs staff to explore options for reducing the minimum parcel area and frontage width for small scale multifamily zones as part of the 2025 OCP update. We can get a mover. Moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on that committee recommendation? All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. The second is the tree management and protection bylaw update, that council forward $50,000 to the special project budget consideration for an update to the Comox tree management and protection bylaw number 1125-1994. There's a motion. That's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on the protection bylaw update? We had Councillor Haslett and then Councillor Blacklock.
So just to confirm, at our last special meeting there, we discussed, or we briefly talked about a 30,000 versus 50. The 30,000 was only to look at large lots in Comox versus the 50 would encompass every lot that is in the Comox boundary. Is that correct?
Through to CAO Wall.
Yes, that's correct.
Any follow-up question, Councillor Haslett, or does that satisfy? Okay, Councillor Blacklock.
Just given, we have come through a pretty intense southeast storm event last year. Bomb cyclone. Will the 50,000 or will we be giving any consideration to in tree management, educating the public around winds and trees and what you can do to maintain and prune trees so that they are less more resilient to high wind speeds?
So the question would be whether that would be included in part of that $50,000 budget. It's just kind of emergency management and how it relates to private trees. Over to CAO Wall.
That's something that could be included, yes.
Other questions from council on the current recommendation 1125, comment 1994. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that, I'll vote this time, sorry. All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes. Thank you, everyone. We're on to consent agenda on page 16. We'll just move those two items together for receipt. Moved and seconded. All those in favor of receipt? Opposed? And that passes. And would anyone like to pull out items 1 or 2 for further discussion? Councillor Grant. Okay, so number 2 is pulled out and seconded, and you've got your mic on, which is great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are we going to get back to, is it Mr. Bus, I guess it is? You know, when you put crosswalks in areas like that, they're really highly dangerous crosswalks and not really recommended to do. And I'm just wondering what our correspondence would be like when we get back to it, because, I mean, unless people think I'm wrong, I just don't think that's a very appropriate spot.
I would agree, and over to CAO Wall with what level of feedback we would give to this specific letter.
With all of the traffic requests that we have in now, we let people know that they're referred to the budgeting process. This one has just missed the cutoff for the budgeting process in 2025, so it would be included in 2026 unless council were to otherwise direct we do something earlier.
I do believe this spot has come up before and past at that Balsam, and it was kind of noted that it wasn't a safe spot. So I'm not sure if council has any recollection, but it may not make sense to say we're going to review it in 12 months if it is going to more likely be rejected. But I'm not sure if people have any future. Councillor Grant.
Yeah, I would think we'd be better to either deal with it tonight, just say we're not going to do that, and just send them a letter. I don't see any purpose in continually bringing this back. I think it's just not the right place to put one. And, you know, unless somebody has some objections to that, I think we should just end it so we don't continually do this.
Any other thoughts on that, whether we send a letter that will not be done based on past traffic studies, or if we move it to the 2025-2026 budget? Councillor Swift.
Well, I would prefer that the citizen gets an answer sooner. So I would recommend, and I think there are some engineering regulations around where crosswalks should go, are they not? Yeah, and so I think that's a good place to start.
Okay, so it sounds like we probably need to have a motion that council send a letter to Mr. Bus there in regards to that crosswalk, and that would come to myself for just a quick approval before it goes out, so I can take note of some of the items you've said, and hopefully it's adequate to giving that information and hopefully direct him to our traffic policy online also, which can be read.
I can move that.
So that's moved and seconded. So just to be clear, that's motioning that instead of putting that forward to 2025 budget, that we would be answering him sooner with some policy information. All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. Are there any other items to pull out? Councillor Swift.
Thank you. Item number 1.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I know this person has came to council expecting her issue to be dealt with at that time, and I would I don't think that she's correct in that Courtney offers 120 liter cans for recycle. Is that correct?
The smallest size for recycling is 240 liters.
Right. So any response should include that as part of the correspondence.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say we can respond with some of the different policies and information, but I don't think there's a change from what we are going to offer as far as the change. Unless anyone has anything that's different than policy, we can provide more information back. And Councillor Blacklock.
From our conversation, or from my personal conversation with her, it sounded like there was an expectation that she could exchange the larger recycling for a smaller recycling and then pay less money for it. And certainly I acknowledge her business sense, but I think that's be opening up a dangerous road if we started doing that for everybody. You get away with the smaller recycling bin. The bins, I understand, are attached to the addresses and to the house. So, you know, you have to think beyond just your ownership of the house. Next owner might want the larger bin as well, so. I've seen it on our street personally that people just, we've seen neighbors team up together and share recycling if they have lower amounts to one bin every 2 weeks. And it seems to work well as in addition, so. As long as she gets an answer back, I think that should be satisfactory.
Great, noted, and I believe all the consent agenda items that are discussed or not discussed, I'll get a response back. So it's perfect. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? 2 items there. Okay, so we're moving along to unfinished business. We have the delegation from 2 weeks ago from Louis Bartholomew, founder of the Alberni Project Society. And there was a request to council whether there would be any assistance available for the relocation of the HMCS Alberni Museum and Memorial at Ham. So we can either just receive this as information, or if there's any comments on what Comox Council could potentially do to assist this request for space.
I'll move receipt.
Okay, so receipt has been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on receipt? Councillor Mayor.
I think the only question I have is wondering if staff are just considering requests like this when they're looking at kind of new community center builds or expansions or town hall builds, and thinking about all the different needs in the community, or if there's any other suggestions from staff.
Over to CAO.
Yeah, when we're envisioning a future civic center, we are going to be going through a process that will take into account all the different needs and potential centralization of facilities. And I think through that process, there may be the opportunity for an organization like this to find space, but we're years away from being able to do that at this point. And as far as potential suggestions for solutions in the near term, unfortunately, we don't have any.
Just a question, receipt at this time is a great idea, but are we open to sending a response letter, just summarizing kind of some of the comments that we made in person about connecting with some of the museums? Because I think at this time, that's probably the best connection that they can be making is whether there really is space potentially with Courtney or Comox Museum, or we can leave that as verbally. We did pass that feedback on, so at council's will.
I'd be in favor of a letter, and I wonder if they want to speak to CBRs if they haven't yet. I think that's part of CBR's its role actually is to help us with that advocacy and connection. Yeah.
Councillor Blacklock.
You know, I walk around our marina, and we have, you know, very informative and beautiful history storyboards that dominate don't dominate, that they are located on the walkway and on the harbor walk. You know, at a minimum, a display in honor of the Alberni might be something that could work in the short term while the main exhibit is in storage, waiting for a better venue to host it. Just an idea.
Councillor Swift.
Thank you. I was really disappointed when he said that he wasn't able to get collaboration going with the DND and the museum out there, because I thought, well, that's a really good fit. And also it seems like he's been working with the Legion. But I think in all of this, I think it's important to also communicate that as a town, we don't have a lot of space. And it's not that we have space that we don't want him to use. It's just that we don't have any space. So, and I think that's an important message to convey when we're responding.
Okay, we can make some notes there, and Councillor Blacklock, to kind of tie in what you mentioned is depending on what council would like to do, we could put at the end that if there's some desire for some signage to add, we could look at that at council without committing to it, but that could be a portion of the letter, kind of a soft. We'd have to be then prepared to look into what the cost would be, but
And at that point, I would refer to 2026 budget. So let's have that conversation first.
okay. So I'll just quickly make the motion that we send a response letter thanking them for the delegation, going through that we really don't have the space at this time, but we're happy to make connections to other museums and potentially talk about signage in the community to honor the history that they're preserving there. Is there a seconder for that motion? Any questions or comments about sending the letter that we don't have the space at this time? Councillor Grant, questions on the motion? Do we have motion for receipt? I thought we received it. Okay. Apologize. So we'll go for receiving first. All those in favor of receipt? Opposed? That receipt passes, and then we'll put the motion on the table to send a formal response since they came as a delegation. It's been moved, seconded. Again, it's just to say that we don't have space. We think that there could hopefully be some collaboration with some of the museums in the interim, and that potentially in a future budget cycle, 2025, 2026, we could look at having a sign in Comox without 100% looking at what that would look like. All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes. Thank you. There are no special reports. There are no bylaw adoptions. Now we're on to new business. On page 18, there is a report there. The council approved replacement of the Comox Community Center in infrared saunas. Councillor Grant.
I would like to move that we do a small survey at the rec center to find out how many people are actually using this and whether it's good value or not. You know, it seems to me that if you have, 10 people a day using it, that's pretty good. If you have 10 people a year, maybe we don't need it and we have no idea. So a small survey at the front desk for a week or 10 days would probably suffice.
Thanks for the suggestion. Just over to CAO Wall through potentially Director of Recreation. Are we able to is there any soft information for the usage in past? And I believe there was.
Yeah, I'll pass that over to our Director of Recreation. I will answer on behalf of the Director of Recreation. What we can say is that since the infrared saunas went down in the women's change room, we have noticed that there is a small but dedicated user group who are asking questions about when it's going to come back online. It's not something that we have any specific data on, and it's very hard for staff, even the staff that are out and about in the community center, to know how much use is happening because they're in the change rooms. So since they've been down, there's a small but dedicated user group that we've discovered. How much use is happening, we don't know.
Sounds good. Just to confirm before I go to other, that was a motion, correct? Okay, so that has been moved and seconded that a survey be done. We'll have to get a little more timeline, et cetera, on that. Councillor Mayor. Sorry, my question isn't about the survey. Doesn't matter. It depends. Okay. It's about the infrared sauna and could convince someone either way on a survey, then go.
Well, I mean, it sounds like we have anecdotal data. If we're getting 2 to 4 calls daily about the sauna, and assuming it's not just the small interested user group who's spam calling the front desk. It sounds like there's good interest. I think I mean, I would be, if we want to collect data, it might be more interesting to find out. I have to think about it a little bit, but about other community center use. I think there's lots of health benefits, and it's certainly like kind of a trend in the health world. My question though is, do we need to have 2? Like, can back in the old days, I remember there was just one sauna for everybody. Is it possible to just have one?
through to CAO Wall, and if possible, if we can, is there any working mics? back there?
Maybe we'll just invite Ted to join us at the front.
Seems like we're gonna have more questions, so we'll have you come over. Thanks. Director.
That's an interesting question to ask, whether we could relocate the sauna. I would need to discuss that with CAO Wall and the potential impacts to the design of the building, but it's a question that we could certainly investigate.
I would posit if council's hoping that this would be a cost saving measure, it won't be a cost saving measure. We're gonna have to take down walls, move stuff around. So I say that a little bit off the cuff, but I can't imagine that we come back and tell you it's cheaper than just having the two saunas.
I was trying to be very accommodating in my reply, and I would concur with CAO Wall on that thing.
Just a quick question. Is the thought that these last about like 20-ish years, just looking at what the tax implication of 78 cents per household is it, did the last one last 2 decades?
It predates the 2010 renovation. And that's, we'll call it 15 years. So that at a minimum is what we'll say.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Grant.
Yeah, so we used to have a steam bath in there. When that finally gave up, they took it out, and that's when they put these in. So that would have been easily 20 years ago. So there you go. Yeah, but all I want to do is just get a basic idea of how many people are actually using it, and then if it is the way it seems, I mean, I'm only talking about 10 days here. I'm not thinking we're gonna put this off for 8 months or anything. And then if it does look good, then just go ahead with it. That would be my plan.
Just through to CAO Wall, is there any idea, or is that something we can leave to staff operationally and say, not a huge cost thing, but kind of come back in 2 weeks and make a decision if there's enough gym users or people using the building saying that that would be something they'd want. We can get that rough percentage and make a decision from there.
Sorry, what rough percentage?
Just the data. I'm not sure we're
Okay.
going to set the number today of what percentage of gym users
I see.
or full rec center users we would need, but just the timeline of how long the survey would be, and operationally you can decide how it's, how it's done, when it's done, who's the right person, but we don't need like a big budget hopefully attached to that.
No, I think what we can do is just have some paper check off as people come in, or we can ask them. I think what you'll tend to find in these type of surveys is that you get a self-reporting of people who use it. But that will give you an idea of the number of people who are using. Whether or not we can give you a percentage of users who are using the sauna, probably not. We can probably get a closer idea of how many people are using them on a daily basis or a weekly basis.
Yeah, I don't know about the rest of you, but I just want to know, are we getting like 5 people like a month using it, or are we having 5 a day? And if we're not getting very many, then we don't need it. If we're getting a lot of people, or even a small number, then we should probably do it. I just want to know, because I have no clue what's going on with Bring It.
If you're gonna put me on the spot, I would say it's 5 a day, not 5 a week.
I don't want to put you on the spot. So I don't want to put you on the spot. I just want to get the public to tell us, right? So that's the point.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table for a survey 10 to 14 days to take place at the rec center, just to get a possible total of the users who say they would use it. Sounds like that's more realistic. Any questions or comments on that motion? All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. So we'll move forward with that as the first step. And it is $86,000, so we'll make sure it's well spent, if spent. So we are now on page 21, the development variance permit application 24-4 for 1966 Guthrie Road. That development variance permit 24-4 for proposed lot 2 of 1966 Guthrie Road be approved, subject to adoption of zoning amendment bylaw 1850.43, and that administration be directed to issue the permit. It's been moved and seconded, and this is of course on the depressed patio in front of 1966 Guthrie Road. Any questions or comments on that DVP? Councillor Grant and
Just
then
wanted
Councillor Haslett.
to note and be be sure that I understood this correctly, but we're not actually looking at dropping the building. We're just not going to raise it. So there was some concerns about water on the neighboring property. And if we're not going to dig a hole to put it in, it shouldn't affect it. Is that correct?
I'll go over to CAO Wall.
Yeah, that's correct. The variance is to allow them to build at grade where the ground is now.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Hazlitt.
My question also had to do with the grade, so. everyone's been answered.
Any other questions on DB permit application 24-4? All those in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. We're now on page 37 for the mobile food vendors. Number 1, that the Comox Parks Use Bylaw Amendment number 1881.02 be given first, second, and third reading. And a seconder. Moved and seconded. And any questions or comments on this Parks Use Amendment update? Councillor Swift.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, I know the Filbert was noted as a place where food trucks could be. And I just would like it to, I'm just assuming that if somebody came in with an application, that there would be some involvement with the Filbert board before it's approved.
Over to CAO Wall.
Do you want to answer that, Shelley?
Yes, that's correct. So
Thanks for that question. Any other questions on number 1 on the bylaw amendment 1881.02? This is for first, second, and third reading. All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. We're now on number 2, that the draft Marina Park Policy CCL-072.01 as detailed in the November 14th, 2024 report from the corporate coordinator titled Mobile Food Vendors be approved. Moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on the park policy? All those in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. We are now on page 45 for the proposed 2025 to 2029 water and sewer budget and financial plan. And we do have a presentation from Director Henley. So take your time to get set up there. Whenever you're ready, and we'll just make sure the mic's on red for anyone online.
Thank you, Council. I presented here the first portion of the 2025 to 2029 budget and financial plan. This is the proposed water and sewer budget. So just as information reminder, water and sewer services are generally self-funding within each of their own categories, and that's done via cost recovery. The expenses, that means the expenses for the service are paid for by revenues from the service. And the revenues are primarily user fees with some parcel taxes, grants when available, development cost charges and developer contributions from the capital side. And then debt, if any. We don't have any debt proposed. And internal reserves funded by user fees and parcel taxes. So that's where we collect money in advance of future need. Building reserves. So we'll just take a look at the water budget. A brief high-level summary. And that goes along with the budget package that we provided. The transfers from reserves, we'll see shortly, are increasing dramatically as deferred water capital repairs due to COVID and lack of funding are included in the budgeting. The water parcel taxes are forecasted to rise to meet increasing capital replacement costs. And all of the water parcel taxes go towards capital. It's a steady rate of increasing the cost of water from the CBRD of about 1% per year. And that's how we were budgeting our user rates, with an increase of 1% per year. But unfortunately, as we'll find out in the next few slides, that wasn't actually providing us with enough money to pay for the capital repairs. So we have budgeted an increase of 3% generally annually to meet that capital replacement funding needs. So this is the summary highlight of the various water areas. And what you'll see in the green down at the bottom, where you see capital expenses, the 1, 2, 3, fourth from the bottom, you'll see that in the past it was 175,000 in 2022 budget. 2023 budget was 558,000, and then in 2024 budget it was 55,000. But then you can see where the numbers are really, really dramatically growing. Some of these projects were proposed earlier, as mentioned, and due to COVID or lack of funding, they were pushed out. And then it was identified in the 2024-2028 budget that there was a lack of funding to do many of these, about a $2 million shortfall. So you'll see that for 2026, there's $1 million in capital alone. In 2027, 2.3 million, another 2 million, and then 1 million. These are numbers that we cannot raise the funds for the year before. We have to be raising those over a period of time, preferably 5 to 10 years. And so perhaps it might be useful in the future to do a longer outlook for capital, similar to what Campbell River does with a 10-year budget, but we're just managing with the 5-year this year. The other expenses are generally trending normally. So the water budget summary. Oops.
Can I just ask a really quick question while we're on that sheet? And I don't know if anyone else has questions kind of while we're on it. I get that year to date for 2024 actual is probably missing the 2 months there being in November, but it looks like the overall expenses and the distribution is quite a bit lower than budget. Like we'll end up with 3 million actual expenses with a budget of 4 million. So I'm just wondering if we're using.
These are the actual to date. And so there's likely at least probably 3 monthly invoices we haven't yet received and paid for from the regional district. So, perhaps I should have left that column out, but I did want to have some numbers as a reference to where we're at in this area. So we are expecting a number of additional invoices from the regional district, and then the end of the year's reconciliation.
Okay, but it is looking like we're under on the expenses side, just from even if 3 months we're out.
It could be. It all depends on the various months and the weather and months and things like that. So that's the real challenge budgeting ahead of time. Is some years are drier, some years are wetter, and that can affect whether people do irrigation. So I don't want to put any forecast in, and perhaps that large number at the bottom is a little misleading.
Okay, thank you.
So with the water capital projects, the full list of projects are in that budget package with you. I did want to point out 2 things. So primarily, most of the scheduled work is water main replacements, and staff has done their best to time that with regular repaving. So if the road's going to be repaved, that's an opportune time to review whether it's needed to replace the water main, so that later you don't have cuts in the roads. And the 2 largest projects are the 891,000, the Church Street water main replacement for optic Comox. And then I believe council has discussed during development discussions about the water main Anderton and Pritchard, and how it would loop the water system in North Comox and provide better water quality and improved water pressure that's commensurate with the rest of the system. And that is growth oriented. So I believe it's about 50% potentially funded by DCCs. Now, whenever something's funded by DCCs, that requires us to actually collect the DCCs. If we don't collect it in advance, we have to either delay the project or decide how we're going to offset the lack of DCC funding. Here's just an example of the water revenues. We have a number of charts in the budget workbook or in the budget package, but the just as a percentage, typically our largest is the sale of services at the bottom, and that's just because of the sheer volume of water that we use. And then the parcel tax is typically the next largest. And then there's where you can really see in the black the money that we're taking from reserves to pay for the water capital. Generally, we fund capital from reserves. We put the money into the reserves and it comes from the reserves for capital. And that's where you can see the large increase going towards the capital in those projects that are now being coming to fruition. There are some areas where we're expecting to use DCCs, such as in 2027, that one project I just mentioned. You're not seeing a lot of money for grants because typically water and sewer systems are meant to pay for themselves. The challenges that we have, I've already touched on one of them, but the growing capital replacement costs, at least in this 5-year outlook. And there's where I mentioned the 2024 to 2028. It identified a $2 million shortfall, and how staff dealt with it at that point was just to cancel the projects and not fund them or move them forward to a future year. And it was deemed not in the best interest to continue to forward these to future years. There are standards that need to be maintained for the water quality, and so we did not want to continue to defer them. And staff will review post 2029 expenditures to ensure adequate revenues are collected in advance. So that's where I mentioned we ideally in the future should take a little bit longer outlook than 5 years, so that something like this doesn't creep up on us all of a sudden, you know, in 2033 or something like that. So the water reserves forecast, just to show you where we're at. The top one is basically the fund where the money comes from the excess of the operating, but in the water, we generally put any surplus towards the water capital works reserve. And there you can see it growing. And then in 23 to 24, it doesn't really grow, it declines. And then it grows a little bit in 2025 with what we're proposing, and then it still drops. So even with the increased user fees and with the proposed increase in the parcel tax, which we'll discuss in a moment, it's still going to drop to about 400,000 by 2029. Now, what we did also want to do is do a review. Do we have enough money to deal with fluctuations in the operating revenues? So some years what we found was there was 1 year where the water system had a negative 178,000 result in 1 year, and then another year was positive 235,000. So there will be ups and downs based again on the weather and the usage patterns. And so we felt that there should be at least a minimum $200,000 in the water RFP to cover off those fluctuations in 1 year or the next. And then we did want to establish a baseline of $300,000 in case there was an emergency that's unbudgeted, perhaps say a road washout or something like that, so that we have that emergency money there. So this doesn't quite get us there, but it should improve in the future. But that would only really cover off one emergency event in the next 5 years. So that's the basis of the reserves. So there you have the increase that we forecasted for the water rates, 3% each year. But in 2029, we would have to look at 4%, but of course, we'll continue to review that as the years come. The parcel taxes forecast we've got is we're at 75 right now. We're proposing to go to 85 for 2025, and then just $5 an increase in 2026. But then following in 2027, we're looking at a much larger increase. And so what we've put forth is the
bylaws that we've put forth today. In the past, we've only passed bylaws that would change the rate for the following year. And what we're proposing is proposed increases for the next 5 years. We could always come back next year and modify it, but if we don't need to modify it, it's already done. And one of the things that I noticed in the past was it's sometimes left to the end of the year to change the parcel tax, or even as late as May. And then that results in blended rates and makes it much more difficult to advise the public. If we would know much more in advance, and we could advise the public in a more regimented fashion instead of in the middle of the year. So that's what we're proposing with that. And again, council could always change it in next year based on forecasts. Now, the effective water parcel tax increases is in the red. If we do increase the parcel tax, then we'll end up with a budgeted $416,000 in the reserves remaining, which would go towards that minimum 500,000 we felt we should have. If we do not increase the parcel taxes, the increases are going to be about $800,000 cumulative based on the growth that we have estimated of 15 new units per year to 2029. So then it would then be a negative 400,000, and we would have to look and cancel one or two projects. Any questions about the water before we move to sewer?
Councillor Blacklock.
We're gonna set 5 years worth of rates today. Are these, and you said we can come back and review them annually, are these tied to a year zero? Are these inflation adjusted? Are these, we're gonna charge in 2026 $90 like an actual $90, or $90 where year zero is today? So like 90 plus inflation. Like a purchasing power of $90 in a year.
Yeah, those are in today's dollars. So that's the actual dollar that we have charged. And the capital that we have in the budget is inflated to the year that we're spending it. But of course, we don't know what the actual cost will be until we.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm getting at is we could get in a situation where the inflation rate, goes back up to 8, 9, 10%, and we are stuck with in 2028 110. But as long as we can change it each year, we won't be stuck.
Right. And these bylaws haven't changed at any time. We're just trying to avoid the cases of there were 3 or 4 years in the last 10 where it was not done before the beginning of the year and ended up with blended rates. So we're trying to improve that, and then the more time that we have, it allows us better messaging to the public.
So which projects have we already deferred on 27?
It's a number of the ones in the budget package. So basically, a number of projects were sometimes shifted to the following year. Oh, it's not in the budget. It's in the. It's perhaps not in that you have. No. So. I'll get that budget package. It's in the agenda package after the 2 pages of the introduction report.
So the capital projects. So there's been a number of shifting around of our capital projects. Some part of it for funding, part of it because we can't do everything at any given time, part of it for delays for the conveyance project. It's a mixture of all of those things, and the water is, to the point that Director Henley is making, is that water is one of the reserves that hasn't been fixed yet to account for the fact that we haven't saved enough money in the past. And we need to move forward with doing that sooner rather than later. And one of the reasons for that is you saw the projection into 2029 where we get into the negative amount. That can happen in other communities. That can happen in lots of places. You're just borrowing from other reserves. The problem is we don't have any of our capital reserves that are strong enough that we should be depending on those to be able to borrow. We know we're probably going to have to go into debt for the new capital that we have to do. For example, the expansion of the fire halls, a new town hall. So we want to try and ensure that our other capital reserves are self-funding.
So on the screen there, what you've got is a list of the capital projects over that 5-year period. And so it's each of the columns shows which year the expenses will be in. The first two are just regular expenses. The second one is the 810. Generally, most of the projects will have the year before pre-engineering work would go at 10%. So that's a 2028 project. But what I'm referring to is in prior budgets, they were pushed forward or just removed from the budget because there wasn't, it said cancel, reserve runs out of money. So those were some of the things. And then some of them had been pushed forward already before. I can't tell you exactly which ones, but some of them had been deferred because of lack of funding.
I know if Councilor Kerr was here, we'd say, why fund it now when we can fund it later at twice the amount? I commend you for trying to get the capital projects like done at the same time, like Church Street, we're gonna pave, we're gonna redo sewer, water, all at the same time. So if this helps us do that, then I think the public will be understanding of that increase to water rates. With respect to DCCs, you only have the 1 year, 2027, showing a DCC revenue. Is that you're only including the 1966 project, or which projects are you including in that DCC amount?
Thank you. Development cost charges are related to growth projects. And so they can only be the projects that are identified in the DCC study. Our DCC study is from 2016. Perhaps there are new areas, places that will all be identified in the 2025 DCC and ACC study, although this would be under DCCs. And so there will be a wholesale updating of everything and an updating of the costs because inflation, as you mentioned. And that will be coming to council for review and approval in due course. And then, of course, this will do a wholesale update of this and whatever changes need to be made. But again, the issue with DCCs is it's great to say that you paid it from DCCs, but if you don't actually have the DCCs, then where am I going to get the money to offset it? I've already shown that the water reserve is almost depleted, even with the increases. So, maybe we'd have to borrow from the sewers for a year or so, but it's not ideal to do that either. Just they have their own requirements.
Councillor Swift.
Hello. Thank you. I'm just curious about the Beaufort Road one where the water main replacement is Northern Church. And it's listed as being 50,000, I think. Is that not part of the sewer conveyance project?
Yeah, that's likely an amount that's held over just in case the project runs over from year to year. So we just need to have money budgeted in that next year to pay any expenses that happen to go over the calendar year.
I'm just still trying to understand the kind of year-to-date budget, and I get that there's probably 3 months, maybe not just 2 months, but that still puts like the overall distribution and expenses around 3 million, but we're budgeting 4 million, going upwards to like 4.7 million in the next couple years. So to see the parcel tax go up 50% and be a small part of the budget, is there, when we're forecasting 2025, 2026, is that kind of forecast plus? Like, are those kind of inflated? Year to date, it looks like our water distribution and expenses are going to be quite a bit lower than forecasted. And so it's hard to then set rates based on the forecast that could possibly be lower expenses this year. I don't know if there's any explanation for why water usage was maybe lower this year, or if there's maybe more than 2 or 3 months of expenses that are outstanding.
I think what we can do is you can take a look at where the past year's budgets ended up. You do tend to get larger billings coming towards the end of the year as people look to bill out, and expenses that hadn't been accounted for in the GLs are done. To understand, one thing that will happen is you go through reconciliation at the end of the year are items that weren't coded properly, were coded to the wrong spot, forgot to be coded to the GL, get reconciled and put into it. But when you take a look at our year over year actual expenditures, we do see a fairly steady increase going from our actuals in 2022 up to our actuals in 2024. And we expect that to continue, especially with the large capital infusions that are needed in the system in the next 5 years. So if it does come out, and if it comes out that we have largely, we've greatly over budgeted and that money's not needed, it'll come back to council next year and you'll be able to say, okay, well, we've got this excess revenue. We don't need to increase the parcel taxes this year. But from everything that we're seeing, that charge is required in order to maintain our capital.
Yes.
So if we refer back to the prior years, it doesn't show 2022. 2022 actual at the year end was, I think, minus 178. So we were in a deficit. And then the following year in 2022, we were back almost even, above even, if we're just looking over 2 years with 235,000. But then last year, in 2023, we had a difference of 77,000. So our revenues were only 4.41 million and our expenses were 4.49 million. So we've been really actually pretty good in the past in terms of forecasting this. You never know if 1 year's a dry year and people use more water or less water or whatever. So don't look at the bottom line. There's a number of bills that we haven't received yet. You'll look at the transfer 2 is budget 447,000, the top one in expenses, and we haven't even booked the expenses there yet. That'll be done at the end of the year. So
we could be sitting on a $250,000 bill that's simply not coded to the GL yet, and that'll jump up right away.
It's hard to use it as a data point, but I see you're saying there's still a quarter of the year plus, but. So looking back at the previous years is probably more realistic. Thank you.
But you do have a good point there. Sometimes it's difficult to plan ahead. So for example, there was that question about the parcel taxes. In the past, we had been estimating a growth of 20 new units or properties per year, but it's actually turned out to be about 14 over the last few years. So we've actually now reduced that down to 15. So where it might have thought in the past we didn't need to increase it as much, or even identified with the 2 million, we're getting fewer. And so this year, actually, I believe the last time I looked at it, we only had 14 new builds. If we look at the single family dwellings, right? If we discount the province, for example, and that's, I think, is lower than the prior years. So we have to take that into account as well. There's not as much new growth in new users to help with the future parcel taxes. Okay, with the sewer budget, the summary again, large upcoming capital projects, no surprise there. Most of the larger ones here are actually required for the expansion and for the growth. We'll get to that. But then we have a dependency on DCCs, which again, we haven't yet collected. One of the challenges we have with DCCs is when we collect it at subdivision, we're collecting based on the lot. And then later when it's actually built, then we look at how many units and then collect further. So for example, the new apartment buildings, maybe only 4 units were collected at that time, but then, oh, now it's not going to be a couple of houses, it's going to be, or 4 houses or whatever, it's going to be 210 units like that other project we were talking about. So we're really dependent on when are they going to build? When are we going to receive the money? So, but then they need some of these money spent beforehand in order to be able to get the building permit to build. So that's the challenge that you have. The sewer parcel taxes again are forecast to rise to meet increasing capital replacement costs. And the user rate increases to match the CVRD rate that they propose to increase for treatment costs. So we'll get to that. So we're not looking at an increase above the CVRD rate. So again, this is the general schedule here. You'll see that there's 2 years, 2026 and 2029. If you look at the capital line again, where there's these almost $3 million projects. So these are really large projects. When we get to them, you'll know about them because you talked about them before. And this is a little bit different. So the way that we get charged for sewer is we pay a percentage of the volume that we use rather than the actual metered usage that we do in water. So because it's a shared service and of course effluent isn't metered. So that's the challenge that we have there. Sewer capital projects. It's again listed in the budget package. We can bring that up in a moment. And it's primarily, again, scheduled sewer main replacements that are summertime with the scheduled road repaving similar to the water. These are the 2 largest projects that I mentioned, the Central Foreshore main, Port Augusta to Maine, and then the Foreshore main, Carthew to Ellis. And we are hoping that we can use half grant for one of them. We have to look at whether what year the money has to be spent by, in case we don't collect the DCCs by then. And so we'll be reviewing that again next year during the DCC study. The source of the water sewer revenues again, it's primarily as a percentage the sale of services. That's the user fees. And you'll see in 2026 and 2029, there's that big red chunk and the big gray chunk. That's one assuming is paid by DCCs, the other by the half grant. And we might swap the 2. We'll see how things go with that. The challenge in the sewer services is, of course, the growing capital replacement costs. We're not in as tight a position with the reserve here. But then again, we haven't done that 10, 20-year outlook, which is the pie. So the Foreshore projects are dependent upon CERDCs that we may or may not receive. The one thing with the half grant, the Housing Accelerator Fund, is I've been reading a lot of newspaper articles where mayors are pleading, asking, whatever you might want to call it, their federal representatives to not provide them the money on a goal achievement basis by year, but all up front, because there's concerns that a potential new government has announced that they're going to cancel it, and maybe the money midstream will not flow because the money will be used for a different method of housing affordability. So that's a concern. So we don't necessarily want to count that we're going to get that other $2 million or $3 million, depending on the date of the election, and who gets elected. So there is some uncertainty there. I would say it's unusual that a grant that agreements have already been signed would be canceled midstream. I don't remember that ever happening in my career, but you know, anything can happen. So that is a consideration there. And then again, with water and sewer, we want to one day maybe come to council with some proposals as to what's an optimum mix of, should we collect the capital cost from parcel taxes, which is on a per property basis, no matter how much your assessed value is, or no matter how much water you use or sewer you use, or do we want it based on user fees, which is based on volume that you do use? And every municipality does this very differently. There's no right or wrong answer, but it does affect who gets charged. So there's that too. It's not for today, but we'll do that one day. Again, here's the forecast. So if you look at the bottom line, we're still looking at about 7 million left in 2029, but we are concerned that there are some large costs coming out, because this does not include the large CVRD projects, and we're not sure what costs are going to impinge on Comox there. They're looking at changing the location, I believe, of the treatment and things like that. So we're hoping that over the next year or two, we'll get more clarity from the regional district. But again, it's not in as tight a position. So here we're looking at the CBRD, similar CBRD. They're looking at raising rates according to their last year's budget, 6% for 2025, 5% for 2026, 0 for 2027. And then I think 28 and 29 are placeholders if they just put 3%. To me, it sounds like it's a placeholder until they can get more updated numbers. The parcel tax forecast, we're looking at just an increase, keeping the same, or sorry, increasing $5 for 2025, leave it the same for 2026, and then just regular $5 increases after that. And that would assist with inflationary changes, as Councillor Blackwell mentioned. And then again, here's the effect of the parcel tax increase. Again, there are large amounts of funds in there. And it's not a huge change. It's only going to be about a $300,000 change if the increase isn't done. So it's not going to have major impacts if the sewer parcel tax is not increased, at least at this time. So again, the future areas, the concerns, the HAP grant funding is at risk, cancellation. We did notice that we have not been charging fleet costs for water and sewer, and we should ideally be recovering those costs. So we'll look at doing that in the future. And again, we're reviewing the DCC and ACC studies, and that will affect or identify other projects. The future upgrades to the CBRD system may have financial implications. They're unknown at this time. And then again, the revenue source review. So right now, the mix, if we just look at external revenues, forget about funding from reserves, it's about a 12% to 88% parcel tax and sales services, and it'll shift if these increases are approved to a 1585. And then this sewer will pretty much stay the same, 1288. So that may still be there. I'll ask for the sewer projects to be brought up, similar to what we looked at before. And so, we'll get it up in a moment. Time to confirm the sources there. And the others are just the regular sewer main replacements as mentioned.
Questions on the sewer rate bylaw or back to the water tax? Councillor Blacklock.
Have we looked at any possible scenarios with respect to parcel tax on people building additional dwelling units on their properties within their Bill 44? As to whether those sewer connections, if we're adding parcel taxes, do we add them by connection or do we add them by created new title? So like, would subdivision therefore be preferential to stratification if we're talking about sewer funding?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
I think that's something that the consultant is helping us determine. Next year, we were discussing how to apply decencies to a new 4-unit, with the new 4-unit. But again, if somebody's already paid their decencies for their single dwelling, typically you can't go back and ask them for more. So that's, is the legislation going to allow that? And then how do we charge it after? Because if we were collecting that subdivision, they're not subdividing. So there's a lot of questions.
I will just point out that there are jurisdictions that don't assess by parcel tax, they assess by plumbing fixture portfolio. And that's a nightmare. I would highly not recommend going to that system.
Other questions while we have Director Henley in front of us before we move on to the reports? CEO Wall, do you have a?
No, the hamster was turning, but I'll confirm my information before I say it. But I believe, I'll say it anyway. I believe, now that I believe that when you get into registered suites, we have additional parcel taxes, do we not? So that would be, yeah, that would be the same here. As you create additional residences, you could probably add the parcel taxes onto that. So I think we already have a system to manage it.
You're correct. Suites definitely pay the double parcel water and sewer, so that makes sense. Fourplex would be the same. So we are on page 44, and I don't believe we've had a motion, but the first is that council approves Schedule A attached to the November 2024 report from the Director of Finance titled 2025 to 2029 Water and Sewer Budget and Financial Plan, including the recommended increases in the water and sewer user rates, the recommended increases in the water and sewer parcel tax, and the recommended projects. If we have a motion. Moved and seconded. Okay, so any questions or comments around the table on that budget and financial plan? And just, again, we will be reviewing that after this year, but it is a 5-year plan that we're recommending this year for those projects to go forward. All those in favor? We sure can. Councillor Haslett.
Even though this is on a 5-year plan, this is the first time that we're going to be doing this. Will this be brought back to us next year to kind of outline how that 5-year plan start to look if there's changes to be made at that time?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, especially with the Housing Accelerator funds there. So any other questions or comments before we vote on the sewer budget and financial plan? All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation there on those numbers. So we're now on to page 67. We have the sewer and water parcel tax bylaws for first, second, and third reading. That the Comox sanitary sewer and water parcel tax bylaw number 2039 be given first and second and third reading. It's been moved, and a seconder, please. Any questions or comments on that bylaw? All those in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. We're on page 77. We have the sewer and water user rates bylaw. Number 1, that the Comox water rates and regulations bylaw number 529.35 be given first, second, and third reading. That's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Councillor Swift.
Thank you. Is this CAO where I should be talking about the user rates?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. Ever since we started our water metering program, we've had some disparity in the community between our users. And I don't think there's any way to even this out until we're all metered and pay our metered rate. But I'm looking at the rate, and it goes down to page 84. Where the people that are they have a meter, but they're paying a flat rate. And I'm just wondering how many of these users exist in the community?
We weren't able to get that information prior to the meeting, but I can tell you that there were 8 water users since 2016 that switched from metered to flat rate. So generally, I think once you get onto the metering, you stay there, but we weren't able to get data on how many are on each system.
Okay, well, my concern is this. I think people have been put onto these meters, and it may just be a question of some ignorance on their part. But if you're paying the flat rate, but you are metered, you're paying $42 rather than 18, I think it is, per month. And then when we go into the rates above 450 cubic meters, they're paying $1.90 per cubic meter, and the ones that are metered are paying 45 cents. So it feels like we're getting wildly out of balance here, and I'm just wondering if we need to take another look at that.
Not sure if there's any comment from CAO Wall on that, or if there's any information on it balancing.
Or even if people could just be informed as to what's happening here. But if we don't have a sense of how many people are doing that, I don't know how big of an issue this is.
So we encourage people regularly to check their water usage, especially and move to a metered system. That has been sort of the impetus that the town has been encouraging people to undertake. The difference in the billing here between your flat rate users and your metered users, once you get above the 450, was sort of debated and decided by council in the past, because the idea was to make it expensive to stay on the unmetered fee, was to try and incentivize people to switch over to the meter. That doesn't have to remain like that. That's a council decision. You can choose to make it more equitable or closer, but that is the reasoning of where we are. But it really is just a council preference as to how big of a gap you want to have between those two. Obviously, we would need to go back. We wouldn't want to change the number right now. We'd want to go back and make sure we can get everything to balance at the end. But it is up to council.
Well, I would be happier if we did a bit more work on this. I just think it's quite inequitable as it stands, and it may just be that people aren't aware of what the situation is. It's one thing to make a decision at our table, but the communication out in the public, if you're going to go and check I've never checked how much water we've used. So, I just don't know how much time the public has to do that kind of thing. And I think it would make me happier if we were being a little more equitable about this.
What is the type of timeline we have to pass the user fee bylaw as far as communication or education out to residents before we do a final passing, which was on the agenda tonight?
If I can address the previous comment as well as your question. Ideally, what we were trying to do is pass it before the calendar year, because when we pass it after the calendar year, then we end up with blended rates, plus some people pay through their property taxes, where others pay it's just paid partly through taxes, partly through their billing. So it does make it much more complicated. That was the whole impetus of doing the 5 year in advance. And then if we don't need to make a change, it's already done. In terms of the rates, I haven't changed. We didn't change the methodology in the charging. It was just 3% across the board for the increase. So there wasn't an extra put on one versus the other. It's the same regime that's was in place last year, except 3% higher. In terms of examining a new system and whatnot, I've done that before in other municipalities. It's going to take a few months because and what we have in Comox is quite complicated, because in those other municipalities, everyone was on a meter. So there was only one billing system, and that was it. Whereas we've got 3. We've got people on a meter that pay a flat rate. We've got people that aren't on a meter that pay a flat rate, and then we've got people that are on a meter that pay a metered rate. So it's very complicated, and we don't really have the capacity to do it at this time and the other items. So we'd be looking at several months from now. We could, although, continue the billing regime that's already in place and has been in place for a number of years, because I went back to 2013, I think, and that was the last time that the water or the sewer changed, and they just changed some of the categories. But it hasn't really changed for that long of a time. We could approve it for this year with the understanding that staff would review it during 2025 for presentation during the next year's budget. And then that would also, if we're making a major change, you do need, it could be preferable to have advance notice to a lot of the users and let them know in advance. So that could guide their water usage or make changes. We have the overage charge at 145 meters or whatever, but
450.
450, sorry. We may even want to review changing that. I did notice that there are a number of users in the community that were using more than 600 in 1 month. So, I don't know if there's a graduated. We weren't in level 3, so that wasn't an issue. But I did make it known to the CVRD, but again, we weren't in a level 3. So I don't know. I presume it's irrigation. If it's ongoing for several months during the summer, I'm assuming it's irrigation of large properties.
Just gonna take a quick, do you have a comment, Sayo?
Just we're talking about right now, so the council took a deeper look into this. I want to say, I don't think it was last year, I think it was the year before. We used to have the excess amount at 550, and council decided to remove it to 540 and created this disparity in the charge between your metered and non-metered. I think that we could probably do back of the envelope calculations by taking a look at how much money are we bringing, because we're only talking about one specific revenue source, which is metered people who are paying over the 450 meters cubed. So you can take a look at that and you can start to figure out where you want to go. But one thing that's important to understand is if we do this, you have to increase your metered rates. If you're going to drop the flat rate users, that has to come at increasing your metered rates. And in the past, that's not where council wanted to go. So I just want to maybe put that conversation to council before we go down this road of doing the analysis, which I think, again, we could do and have back a little bit easier than going through the full review of the rates. But is council willing to increase your metered rate for surcharge in order to decrease your flat rate user when you're trying to get people to switch to meters? So I maybe just encourage council to have that discussion before we get into going through the analysis.
Councillor Swift.
I think that for me, I think I would be happy if the people that are on this flat rate that are metered had a really good communication piece to let them know what's actually happening. Because I don't believe if they're doing that they probably understand what's happening there. So that would be my comment for this, and to leave it for this year and going forward to get the data to figure this out. And I assumed, we don't want to be in a position where we're getting these people off the flat rate and then having an issue because we don't have enough money. So yes, I anticipated the rate would go up for the metered rate, but it seems to me the most equitable system is that you pay for what you use. And we're not quite in that position because we're not all metered yet, but this could be a step in that direction.
Yeah, over to staff and just maybe a comment on how we can have communication go out to those who are on meters but paying a flat rate, potentially spending more than they need.
So when somebody goes over and are paying the extra paying that extra amount, they get a notice from the town saying you've used your yearly water allotment. You are now into a higher amount. I believe, I'll double check, And if it's not included there, we'll make sure to include it, but I believe it already does include information on how you can go online, how you can take a look at your water usage by month, and then how you can switch onto the metered billing. I think I think that all of that already takes place for anybody that goes over on the 450 meters cube per year, which is the rates that we're talking about. And as far as larger changes go, one thing that could happen is that we just eliminate the ability for people on meters to not use them. Then it would be equitable between those two groups. Now you still have the people who don't have meters, but we would eliminate one of those billing categories.
But we don't have a sense of how many people are in that category without doing analysis, correct?
Not at this time, no.
We'll go Councillor Grant, then we'll go back to Councillor Swift unless it's a follow-up on that question, Councillor Swift.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the whole history of all this, but I won't bore you to death. But it's the craziest system I've ever seen. Honestly, how it ever got here is ridiculous. But you know, to have three different systems, the problem that you have is if you take people off of the flat rate and put them onto the metered rate, the rates all have to go up. And until we know how many people we're talking about, there's really not much point in having a debate until we actually get some numbers. The other issue is if you're using a lot of water and you're on the flat rate, you never want to change. It's a disincentive the way we do it, right? To move people over if that's what you're trying to do. And so any large families that use a lot of water don't want a meter. They love paying flat rate. And so this debate went on and on for a long time, and it's highly contentious in this community. I think it's come down, the level has come down, but there was a year where if you voted to put water meters in, you didn't get elected that year. Everybody hated it, right? And so I think you want to move forward this with caution and proper information before you just start messing with people's rates, because a lot of people still out there that really, it's a really sensitive topic to a lot of people. So I would just caution that we make sure we do it properly if we want to. But I agree, having three different systems for collecting your water rates is just stupid.
Back to Councillor Swift, and then we'll maybe
Yes,
get
thank
comment
you.
from staff.
I was there for much of that, the history of our water meters and the implementation of it. And I agree, it's kind of like dog parks and things. You raise these issues and you wish you hadn't at some point. But I'm talking about the people that are on a meter, but are paying the flat rate. And they are paying $42.49 a month. And if they went on to the metered rate, they'd be paying $18.88. So I'm not sure why they would choose to do the flat rate. They're being monitored anyway. If they go over, they're going to be charged. So I just think it's an education piece. Having said that, we need to know what kind of impact it's going to have across the board with all rates.
Councillor Swift, do you want to make a motion to get a staff report back at some point to council in the next 6 months or a reasonable timeframe on how many users we have under each of those three systems, and just getting a little bit more information on what we could do to clean it up outside of getting everybody onto water meter?
You remember the pushing
Apparently tonight I don't remember that. Okay, don't make that motion. We do have the motion on the table for first, second, and third reading of these user rates. We just go back. So maybe we'll address if there's any other questions we're on 77.1, which is that the Comox Water Rates and Regulation Bylaw number 529.35 be given first, second, and third reading. That is as they are right now and in the plan provided for 5 years to be reviewed annually. Is there any questions or comments specifically on the user rates in front of us now? Councillor Swift.
So if I vote in favor of this, does that preclude having further information coming forward?
It will not. We can have another motion subsequent. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. And before I go on to the sewer user rates, Councillor Swift, did you want to make a motion to have a staff report on more of the statistics around this water use?
Yes, I'd like to make that motion, and in it, I think we should be looking for ways to make the system more equitable, but to see the impact across the board of what it would have for all our meter users.
Perfect. That's been moved and seconded to get more information on each of those three categories. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you for that motion, Councillor Swift. We are now on number 2, that the Comox, did you have a question? Any follow-up? That the Comox sewer user rates bylaw number 2038 be given first, second, and third reading. There is a mover of the sewer user rates, moved and seconded. Questions or comments on the sewer user rates bylaw? All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you, Director Henley, for presenting to us this evening, and we will look forward to those bylaws. There are no notices of motion under correspondence. We do have a letter on page 89 from Pete Chambers, President, Comox BIA, with this letter to be filed and received for information. Okay, all those in favor of receipt? Opposed? That passes unanimously. And just a question over to staff. They do have the request for a levy increase over the next 5 years. So we've received the letter, but would this be the time we look at those levies, or would this come on to a future agenda?
There will be a future staff report coming forward, probably early in the year with the others bylaw.
Okay, so this would come to a future meeting in early 2025, and if we can just send a correspondence back to Pete Chambers, just giving him that timeline and that we received the letter, that would be great as part of this meeting. Do we need a motion to respond to the letter? Correct. Thank you very much. Okay. A moment here. We have no late items this evening. Reports from members of council. If there is anyone who has an item to share from a board meeting or other that they attended as a liaison, you're welcome to put up your hand and share that item. Anything around the table? Councillor Grant. Someone
I
has
just-
an update.
Yeah, I just wanted to report, I went to the RD meetings and all that stuff, but one thing I did do was I went to the lunch for the Phantom aircraft that they've been restoring over the years, and they're building a glass enclosure for it out at the base. They're still doing some fundraising, but it was quite an informative meeting to go to, and there's quite a history there. So if we can help them out in any way, that would be great.
Any other updates from council? Just quickly, thanks to those who attended the Government to Government Comox First Nations event on, I believe that was Monday. That was really well attended. I think there was about 70 people there. They did their updates on the history of Comox First Nation in the territory from the north to the south, and there was a lot of new information. They did give updates on the treaty timeline, which will potentially be ratified in March 2025. So there will be more to come about how we can be a good community partner in the information around that treaty, which is a pretty big thing happening. So 30 years in the making potentially, but there'll be a role for our council to kind of play as passing along information to the community as this becomes more to the surface. And there are no media questions. Any questions from the public? Do you mind coming up to the mic if possible there, Bob? That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, Bob Bowen, 1389 Zephyr Place in Comox. And I put something together based on Mr. Hamley's report today. Now, the letter I wrote to you guys a couple months ago, it took me a weekend to compose, and I did research today, but it's taken me about half an hour to compose this, so I hope it's clear. So it seems to me the costs are increasing for everybody along the way. And that's, I don't know if it's unavoidable or not. But I kind of run my household finances similar to what you folks are doing now. I put contingency funds for that rainy day and hoping it never happens. So I get the concept, and I think it's a good concept. So, and I respect the challenge to try and come up with this money because we haven't been doing it in the past. Now it's all happening quick. So, and I also believe and understand, and Mr. Hanley stated today that probably the HF, the household affordability grants may be drying up, and probably other grants will be drying up as well. I think it's just drying up. So we're going to have to come up with the money else otherwise. So then I've taken the time to go through our permissive tax exemption policies. And then I know you guys, I went through the July 7th and July 10th and August 7th meetings, and you guys struggled with that. I know it's a struggle for you. So what it seems to me is that on Mr. Henley's report on page 55 and 61 indicates that permissive tax exemption includes is included in the respective parcel taxes. So I guess my question is are the parcel tax and user fees exempt from the permissive tax exemptions? On the August 7th regular council meeting on page 198 showed that the total permissive tax exempted for churches, I think it was 6 churches, was $52.9 thousand. And I believe the total amount for 2024 was $243.6 thousand. So that's not a lot compared to the deficits we're talking about here, but it's something. And I just wonder if that's a possibility to look at that when we're looking at the permissive tax exemptions. So that's what I have on that point. I've had one more too, but
Sure. So the question is, the permissive tax exemptions also exempt the parcel tax for the water and the sewer? And I'll go over to staff to answer that. If they have the answer, otherwise we would follow up.
Do you know? I don't know off the top of my head. It varies. So some properties have their parcel taxes exempted and some don't.
I'm pretty sure they are exempted, but there may be 1 or 2 deviations from that, and I don't want to say 100%. That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you had a second question, Bob?
Food for thought. It was on the what we just finished talking about, the water
Water meters?
the water meters. Yes, exactly. So I have a meter, but I'm on the flat rate, and I don't know. We've been fine for over. We irrigate in the summer, so we were fine 1 year, and then I went through the roof. My wife. So I think the way it read was that when you're on a flat rate, you pay up to $451, and then in excess of that. And I thought on the metered, you had $18 or whatever it was for 15 cubic meters, and after that, you would pay a premium for that. So bringing it up to, if you went up to 451, that the metered, unmetered folks would be using, you'd be paying more than 42, whatever it was.
You're correct. Yeah, actually, I figured it all out after council made your decisions, but you're right. So the reason why we have the residential flat rate at the $1.84 is if you're a homeowner and you're on a meter and you're using lower amounts of water, you're better off there. If you are getting close to that 450 cubic meters per year and you're on a meter, you're going to be paying more than the person who's on the flat rate, which is why when you get to that 450 amount, it jumps really high for the flat rate people and is very low for the metered. It's to quickly close that gap so that you don't end up that way. And that was part of the reason why I think we went down from the 550 to 450 as well for how much you can go. So if you are using 450 cubic meters of water per year on the dot, it is better to be on the flat rate than it is to be on the metered. But once you go above that, it starts to cross again. So you can take a look and see where you are optimally. But yeah, and that is why that number is at $1.84 and the residential metered user is paying 44 cents, is because at that point, the metered user has paid about $80 more than the flat rate person.
Yeah, and that's why I monitor it regularly. It's easy enough to find out what you're using over the year and historically and whatnot. So I watch that constantly.
Thank you. You can teach residents then. Okay, so we will move termination at 6:45. Second, all those in favor? Perfect. Thank you to all the senior staff for attending this evening.